This video was sponsored by Dashlane.
Oh no, I pinged!
Hey, who pinged?
It's probably just a stupid everyone ping. One of the most fascinating things to do when looking at media is finding old media that portrayed technology, or more importantly, the internet. Since this phenomenon moves faster than the speed of Kid Danger's run on Nickelodeon, you're bound to catch what people at the time deemed what the internet was, and the jokes that could be made, and what exactly was high tech for their time. So in this special, that I don't really see people mentioning, let's talk about Information Stupor Highway. Also plug in my Discord. So the episode revolves around Timmy using the internet, something that he does partake in, but not enough to pick out many examples from. So what makes him use it at this time? Love.
How about going with me, Timmy Turner, the least popular and handsome guy you know? Think of how good you look next to me in comparison.
His pursuit of Trixie's affection drives quite an amount of pre-hiatus episodes, as it still was a fresh topic at the time, even if we all knew the result. And speaking of fresh, it's always nice to go back to old episodes of the Fairly Oddparents because there's always a wealth of examples of how they made good episodes, and these irreplaceable traits that they managed to go over, without realizing that when you take out these traits, it doesn't make the episode better, it actually makes it worse. And we're gonna go over a few of those. Case number 1, the comedy. It's a fine line in Fairly Oddparents among other Butch Hartman shows to have a few running jokes and common themes within the episode. The key to them is to have them come back after some time, with variation, in order to make it work. It's like when you and your friends make inside jokes and they're so funny after the first time. It most likely doesn't work if you repeat it all the time, especially during the times when it seems obvious. Exceptions do happen though.
Hey, you're writing a threatening love note! That's how I met your mom! If you ever want to see your parents again.
One of the few running jokes within this episode is the threatening and violence surrounding love, in this case a threatening love letter. I'm sure it's done in a way to make the episode not seem so much about love. That's a very smart thing to do. Timmy's parents also just seem different. They have more of a relaxed tone. And Timmy's father doesn't make it super apparent that he is dumb. There's being the slowest one in the pack and being outrageously stupid, which older and newer seasons make quite the clear distinction of. He doesn't crash himself into a wall or bring up Dinkelberg all the time, or even clearly notice Timmy's fairies even though he's not supposed to, and it was built to be a big deal not to happen. How he gets in trouble here is more subtle, a lot more subtle. When reminiscing about his time writing his own personal love threat to Timmy's mother, when they weren't together yet, he takes multiple mistakes in the way that he chooses to communicate how to do it well.
Her eyes, honey. Tell her that her eyes resonate with a depth of intelligence that greatly surpasses yours!
And your eyes, shining, intelligent, deep, and limpid pools of shining love light.
She's actually not mad about the comparison to herself, but that her husband is about to be canceled on Twitter for talking that way about an underage girl. Another thing that's so fascinating about older Fairly Oddparents is just the way that everything was allowed to breathe and relax. We have two things going on here. Timmy's fascination with Trixie and the letter, and then also Timmy's parents. The episode lets Timmy's side relax, and they switch to his parents, and they let them make jokes while Timmy's relaxing, and they don't focus on him. And then once they're physically dragged out of the story, then they switch back to Timmy. That has worked for decades, and it still worked in that episode. And I really do appreciate that slower form of storytelling. And the insane part is, even though I said slower, that doesn't mean that Fairly Oddparents is slow. It's still quick, it's just slow enough to allow things to breathe. That way it sinks in more shots because it's not trying to tell 1,000 funny jokes. We have another running gag of people specifically saying that their love of someone
burns with the white hot intensity of 1,000 suns.
Before we get to the most famous running gag in this episode, and quite possibly even in the series.
But I can't tell her that.
But I can, thanks to my Parental Battering-Ram. It's the latest thing in tough love parenting.
The Parental Battering-Ram. This used to make me laugh all the time back when these episodes were considered new, because it's just an absurd thing that happens within the episode that makes enough sense story-wise, that it likewise makes enough sense why people don't point it out in universe. It's just a wacky way that parents open the door throughout the episode. I'll put it to you this way. It's not like it's Timmy's dad seeing fairies. I'll never forget that.
Hey, why'd you do that?
If I I have to be miserable because of your letter, so do you!
Get back here!
Still in trouble? Gotta go!
I'm always appreciative I had privacy when it came to using my computer. And speaking of, it seriously terrifies me how many people use the same password for everything. But I do understand why, because it's easier to remember. But instead of remembering one password for every website, Dashlane allows for secure storage of different passwords, credit cards, and other secure personal information that is as easy to retrieve for you as one click. That goes for every device you own. And in addition, Dashlane also generates complex passwords, so it's much harder to invade all of your accounts. What makes Dashlane better than other password managers is also their dark web monitoring, personal VPN, and quick notifications if you were ever breached. No longer will you be denied of not seeing something because it wasn't available in your country. So give Dashlane a try, it's free on your first device, and if you want to support the channel with a nice 10% off Dashlane, use my link, dashlane.com/alphaj. Oh, and if your password is 123456, pause this video and change it, you fool.
I can come back!
It's a love letter, and our magic can't interfere with true love!
Now this is where it gets a little tricky, because if the rule is you can't interfere in true love, this gets a little hazy. If I were a lawyer, I'd be called the alpha lawyer, and I'd wear a red and dark gray suit with no pants. But I'd make the case that if you knowingly knew the intent of Timmy's wish to go into the internet, then you are indirectly interfering with true love. Just because you didn't pull the trigger didn't mean that you didn't hire the hitman who did. However, getting past that pick, we get into the world of the internet, or this cylinder wireframe that's seemingly endless. This would have been originally released in 2001, even though it was released in the United States in 2003. So I think it's reasonable to assume this would have been made 2000, 2001. And for that time, this was super cool, and it still is now. I don't know about you guys, but the aesthetic of what the 2000s and 90s considered high tech, ironically, has aged well for some shows. And Fairly Oddparents is one of those shows. I love how geeky it looks, for essentially something as trivial as sending an email. This is what animation does perfectly, and I really can't stress that with these visuals. It also looks like it was done with a workflow that dealt with both 2D and 3D animation, which makes sense why the show would go on to collaborate with a certain 3D show that paved the way. They'd clearly use the 3D elements to good use, making it blend in well with the 2D elements without appearing too polished. Yes, to a trained eye, it's clear to see what is 3D, but what I appreciate about the art style here is that they know which medium to utilize, what idea they're going for the most, that will pop the most. And that's a skill that's very hard to teach. Funnily enough, they use it in other areas as well, such as the seed contraption next to AJ. Another thing I wanted to gush about immediately is the cinematography during the 3D segments. It's clear they wanted to take advantage of animating complex shots in an easier and more consistent way, which is an advantage of 3D, even at its time. It makes the action in the episode look a lot more lively, no matter how much action is truly happening. We get to see Timmy planting the seeds, pun intended, of being perceived as a computer virus, as AJ accepts praise from the president for making an invention that solves world hunger.
NASA thanks you, and the world thanks you.
And
the money has been placed in your account.
AJ is no fool. Which AJ I'm talking about? That's for you to answer. The episode spends the next few scenes setting up that the internet allows for things to be sent around the world in seconds. Why Timmy thinks narrating this in real time in these countries would help hide the fact that by that logic, Trixie would have already gotten a letter is something you don't think about until a picky reviewer says it out loud. I also do have to give props here and praise Hartman and his team, for these scenes could have easily not aged well despite their intention. What makes them work for me is that the joke isn't the fact that she's a kangaroo in Australia, or that they have gorillas in the middle of Africa, and that China would use Chinese letters, but more so the jokes they would interlace within these scenes. Like for example with the girl inside of the kangaroo, she throws a boomerang at the computer and it flies away. Towards the end of the episode, they show this girl again, with the boomerang coming back. Initially, this joke, appropriately, flew over my head. Each of these locations have their own unique joke, and that level of putting effort into comedy is appreciated. We get back to Timmy's dad, who is used to make the battering-ram joke a few times, but this part doesn't make sense, and I'll explain why. For one, he pays his bills in the bathroom, which is fine, but he says that he'll use the computer next time. Dude, the computer is right there. It's not in the bathroom, and it's completely empty. You can sit down and use it. Also, Cosmo poofs himself as Timmy. Keep that in mind, remember that.
Yes, I'm Mr. Crocker. Using my new website at fairiesareal.wand, we'll soon have gathered enough evidence to prove the existence of... There Fairly Oddparents!
It actually took me a second to realize that this is a 22-minute episode. It's not your average 11-minute episode. And to Fairly Oddparents fans, did you know about this? Cause I didn't know about this. When people talk about Fairly Oddparents specials, this is not one that they bring up. However, in hindsight, story-wise, I should have known about this. You have 2.5 conflicts going on here by screen time. The episode initially starts with Timmy wanting to get the love letter back before he gets embarrassed by Trixie. The second conflict is Crocker planning on sending a virus to record Timmy's fairies remotely. And if you're wondering, the half conflict is making sure that Timmy's dad doesn't discover Cosmo and Wanda, as he's trying to use the computer. All of these conflicts cleverly don't overstep their line. They're used interchangeably to not make any of the back and forth seem old. They're even smaller running jokes that are used in other episodes, such as,
Mother, stop interrupting! Can't you see I'm busy ranting?
and that definitely has been used in other episodes. And most of the time it's funny. So Crocker sends a virus to Timmy's computer. Smart guess, I guess. And Timmy goes to send a video of Crocker and address to everyone. We get more lovely shots of Timmy flying around until we get to Trixie. Two pretty glaring problems here story-wise. So let's get the bigger one out of the way. The episode clearly wanting to put in another joke of Veronica being crazy and envious of Trixie and having a crush on Timmy. Problem is, the way they do it doesn't really make sense. If the goal was to have Timmy answer the computer, get to Trixie's computer through the internet, and then delete the email that he didn't send, then he'd have no reason to then jump into a chat room and go see Veronica. He's already been shown to have the ability to hide behind icons, so why would he rush to latch onto an email that takes him away from his destination? Doesn't really make that much sense. Apparently that's because that's the only way to get Veronica within the episode. The smaller of the two glaring problems. Why does Timmy reword the message if his goal was to
Say something that she'd expect Veronica to say.
Veronica already said something. Your job is done. Don't overcomplicate this. Again, with the job being done already, it's so weird to have Timmy go out of his way to inconvenience himself. Unless the thought of Veronica pretending to be Trixie out of jealousy and having a crush on Timmy is fun to you, within the context of this episode. Now, because Crocker is a bumbling idiot, he reveals that he's been recording Cosmo and Wanda, which causes the second conflict to need to be solved. Now, some people may want to point out the absurdity of a virus recording something through a computer screen, or Mr. Crocker somehow being able to hear Timmy through the screen. But I don't really care about that because 1, it's a cartoon, relax. But more importantly, number 2, because the episode has established itself to be silly and unrealistic, so holding it to realistic values here seems a little nitpicky, don't you think?
Cosmo, Wanda, turn the computer off!
That's off, right?
I love Cosmo and Wanda throughout this episode. It's what got me into the show. There isn't this dynamic of Wanda being quote above it and nagging all the time and then Cosmo being dumb as a brick, but rather the two are in sync and being two halves of a whole idiot, something they reference themselves within the show. It makes them seem like they belong together because of their chemistry, not because the show says so. Now, even though the image of a clearly fake Timmy, with the outlines and everything, getting Timmy's dad to fix the computer is funny, especially because Timmy's dad says,
Giga gasp!
which is giga great, we kinda saw Cosmo poof as Timmy earlier, so that's a little bit awkward. What's not as awkward is the continuity here of Timmy's dad making more complex items out of items he found around the house. Now, while there was an entire episode that revolved around Timmy's dad making items, think Super Toilet, and said items not being, let's say not the greatest of quality, I find it a neat touch that he's always been a tinkerer. They actually solved the Crocker part quite quickly. They clearly take the climax of this episode and put it in a really nice looking interpretation of the World Wide Web. It's honestly a pretty creative way to solve their issue, as it wraps around the aspect of Crocker watching the upload through a loading bar, which provides for more comedy than you think. I also love how they're using the term pink hat. It's a reference to black hats, white hats, even gray hats. These are hacker terms. So Timmy, as revenge for Crocker nearly exposing his fairies, takes said video of Crocker and sends it to everyone on the internet, which is a feature on the internet I'm glad doesn't exist in real life. It leads into Crocker being taken away, and Crocker's mother just having the best line.
No! No!
Oh, Denzel, where did I go wrong?
That's the question I ask myself all the time. So the episode ends with Trixie getting the letter anyway, enjoying it, but for her reputation, rejecting Timmy, and Veronica getting virtually trashed. And that was Information Stupor Highway. Completely underrated episode, not talked about nearly enough. I love it. I recommend it to any Fairly Oddparents fan. Just go back and rewatch it. What would you guys like for me to cover in the future? Let me know in the comments down below. Special thanks to the patrons of July. And until next time, take care. Alpha out.